I want to talk about something today that's really hard to think about, but it's important. It's about a verse in the Quran that many people have questions about. And the question is this: does the Quran actually allow a husband to hit his wife? Let's look at what the Quran says, because it's right here in chapter 4, verse 34, and it's something we can't ignore. At least I can't ignore it. The verse says this in Arabic: وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ فَعِظُوهُنَّ وَاهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ. And here's the literal translation: men are in charge of women, because Allah has made the one superior to the other, and because they spend of their property. So good women are obedient, guarding in secret what Allah has guarded. As for those from whom you fear disobedience, give them a warning and banish them to separate beds, and beat them. Then if they obey you, do not seek a way against them. Indeed, Allah is always high, exalted, great. My emphasis is on, as for those from whom you fear disobedience, give them a warning and banish them to separate beds, and beat them. Did you hear that? The verse says that if a husband fears disobedience from his wife, he can first warn her, then stop sharing a bed with her, and finally, beat her. It's right there, spelled out in the text. And I know how hard that is to hear. It's hard for me to even say it out loud, but we have to ask ourselves, what does this verse mean? Why does this verse even exist? Imagine being that woman. Imagine being told that your husband has the right to beat you if he thinks you might disobey him. Not if you did something wrong, but if he fears that you might. How would that make you feel? Would you feel safe? Would you feel loved? Would you feel respected? I think we know the answer. So, where do we go from here? Some people argue that this verse is misunderstood or mistranslated. Others say it's about discipline, not violence. But let's be honest. No matter how we try to explain it, the fact that the Quran mentions beating a wife at all, it raises serious questions. Questions about fairness, questions about love, questions about what it means to truly respect and honor another human being. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm not here to judge anyone's beliefs, but I am here to ask the hard questions. Because if we don't ask them, how can we ever find the answers? This is not an easy topic to talk about, but I think it's something we need to discuss. It's about a specific verse in the Quran, one that talks about how a husband should handle a wife's nushuz, disobedience or defiance. I want to walk you through what Islamic scholars and texts say about this, but more importantly, I want us to really think about what it means, emotionally, ethically, and even spiritually. First, let's talk about this word, nushuz. It's an Arabic term that has been interpreted in different ways. Some scholars, like Ibn Kathir, a famous Islamic scholar,
it means arrogance, rebellion, or refusing to fulfill marital duties.
Other scholars, like those in the Tafsir al-Jalalayn, a well-known Quran commentary,
it means a wife defying her husband's authority.
But think about that for a second. What does it really mean to defy authority? Are we talking about a serious issue, or could it be something small, like a disagreement or standing up for herself? The word feels heavy, doesn't it? So, what does the Quran say a husband should do if he fears his wife's nushuz? It lays out a 3-step process. Step 1, he should warn her. This is called verbal admonishment, basically telling her that her behavior needs to change. Step 2, if she doesn't change, he should separate from her. That means sleeping apart, withholding intimacy. And step 3, if she still doesn't change, the husband is allowed to beat her. Yes, beat her. Now I know how that sounds, and you might be wondering, what does that even mean? Beat her? How? Well, let's look at what the sources and Hadith say. In the narrations of the Prophet's farewell sermon, there is important advice that has been passed down through reliable sources, Al-Tabari and Abu Dawud. In this sermon, there is a guideline that says to avoid being harsh or severe. Simple words express this idea. Strike them, but not severely, or without severity. It's important to mention that the teaching, strike her lightly, not on the face, and not severely, is not a single verbatim hadith, but rather a synthesis of the Prophet's instructions as reported in multiple hadith collections, notably Abu Dawud and Ibn Majah, and his farewell sermon, all relating to the interpretation of Quran chapter 4, verse 34. Classical scholars, like Ibn Abbas and Qurtubi, also added that it shouldn't cause injury. But here's the thing, even if the beat is light and does not leave a mark, how does it feel to know that this is allowed? Because I don't know about you, but I can't stop thinking about the emotional impact. What does this do to a relationship? To trust? To love? Now here's something intriguing. Some modern translations of the Quran have softened this verse. They use words like discipline or reprimand instead of beat. And I get it. Nobody wants to think of the Quran as condoning something that feels so harsh. But if we're honest with ourselves, isn't the meaning still the same? Whether we call it striking, disciplining, or something else, it's still about using physical force as the final step. And so, I have to ask, is this really the best way to resolve conflict? Does this approach reflect the love, respect, and kindness that marriage is supposed to be built on? I don't have all the answers. But I think these are questions worth asking. Because when we talk about faith, about scripture, and about how we treat each other, we're not just talking about rules. We're talking about people's lives, their hearts, their dignity. And I think we owe it to ourselves and to each other to really think about what that means. This is a hard topic to talk about, but it's also an important one. Usually when proposing something as sensitive as this, there have to be objections. I want to address some of those common objections people raise when discussing the Quran's verse about a husband beating his wife. People often use these objections to soften the meaning of the verse or to explain it in a less harsh manner. But when we really look at the evidence, we need to ask ourselves, do these arguments hold up? Let's take a closer look. The first objection I often hear is this. It only allows symbolic light hitting. But here's the thing. The Arabic word used in the Quran is daraba. And do you know what it means? It means to beat. The meaning is not merely tapping or lightly touching, but actually beating. If it was really just symbolic, why doesn't the Quran make that clear? Why doesn't it prohibit violence outright in earlier verses? For example, chapter 4, verse 19, says to treat wives with kindness, not harm. And what about the Hadith? In Sunan Abi Dawud 2228, a woman came to Prophet Muhammad, complaining that her husband had beat her and broken some of her parts. And what did the Prophet do? He only asked the husband to divorce her and that the woman should return the dowry the man paid. So the woman's reward for being beaten is divorce and being left with nothing. The man faces no foreseeable consequences for his actions at all. He'll just remarry and beat another woman again. But the irony of chapter 4, verse 19, is that the husband must not pressure the woman to give up the gifts he has given her unless she has clearly done something wrong. If I connect this verse with Sunan Abi Dawud 2228, then that means that, according to the Prophet, the woman did something clearly wrong, like snitching on her husband for beating her until he broke parts of her. So, if this was meant to be symbolic, why do we see real cases of beating, even in the Prophet's time? Another objection people bring up is this. It's only allowed as a last resort. But here's the truth. The verse doesn't say that. It doesn't require a husband to exhaust all his options before hitting. In fact, some scholars, like Ibn Taymiyyah, a well-known Islamic scholar, even wrote that if a wife refuses intimacy, the husband can strike her without prior warning. Think about that. No warnings. No attempts to resolve the issue peacefully. Just beating her. Is that really what a last resort looks like? And finally, some people say, but modern scholars reject this. It's true that some modern scholars discourage it, but even they don't deny that it's allowed. Scholars like Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who is considered moderate, admit that beating a wife is allowed, even if it's discouraged. And when we go back to the classical scholars, the big names in Islamic law, like Shafi'i, Hanbali, Maliki, and Hanafi, they all upheld this ruling. They all agreed that it's part of Islamic law. And here's the hard truth. The Quran doesn't say, beat. Instead, it commands it as part of a disciplinary process. That's what the text says, plain and simple. I know this is a sensitive topic, and I know it's hard to hear, but we have to be honest about what's written and what it means. At the end of the day, we're not just talking about words on a page. We're talking about people, about relationships, trust, and love. And we have to ask ourselves, does this verse reflect the kind of love and respect that a marriage should be built on? That's a question only you can answer, but it's one we all need to think about. The Quran says that a husband can beat his wife if she's disobedient, and I can't help but ask, why? If Islam is supposed to be feminist, as some say, if it's supposed to protect women and uplift them, then why does it allow any form of hitting, even if it's light? You know what's strange? No feminist system in the world would ever permit a husband to hit his wife, not even lightly. And yet, here we have Islam, claiming to be progressive and just, allowing this. And it's not just that. The Quran doesn't give wives the same right to beat their husbands. It's a one-way street. So ask yourself, does that sound fair? Does that sound like equality? Does that sound like justice? And here's the part that really gets to me. The Quran says, there is no compulsion in religion. Chapter 2, verse 256. That means you can't force someone to believe in Islam. But then, in marriage, it allows force to compel obedience. If Allah is just, if He is merciful, why would He allow this? Why would He endorse violence of any kind in a relationship that's supposed to be built on love and respect? Here's something I often hear. Islam forbids oppression. And to that I say, okay, if Islam forbids oppression, then why does it allow wife beating? How can you say one thing, that oppression is forbidden, and then turn around and allow something that feels so oppressive? It doesn't add up, does it? The truth is, the Quran explicitly allows husbands to beat their wives. It's right there in chapter 4, verse 34. This verse has never been canceled or abrogated, a term meaning overruled in Islamic law. It's still legally valid in Sharia, Islamic law. And as much as some modern scholars try to reinterpret it, calling it a symbolic tap, that's not what classical scholars taught. So, here's the question I keep coming back to. Would a just and merciful God command husbands to physically beat their wives? Or would He abolish that practice altogether? I don't have all the answers. But I think these are questions worth asking. Because if we don't ask them, if we don't wrestle with these hard truths, how can we ever hope to understand what's right and what's just?